My name is Natalie. I'm 46 years old, and I suppose this is the part of my story I never thought I'd have to tell. It's been 3 months since the divorce was finalized. 22 years of marriage, signed away with a few strokes of a pen. People keep asking me how I'm doing, as if they expect me to rise from the ashes, radiant and reborn. But all I feel is hollow. There are days I don't leave the couch. I forget to eat. I forget to care. Fred, my son, he tries. God, does he try. He's 20, far too young to have to carry the weight of a grieving mother. He shouldn't be watching me fall apart, shouldn't be the one checking if I've showered, if I've eaten, if I've even opened the windows. But he is. He brings me coffee in the mornings, sometimes breakfast too. He sits with me through entire afternoons of silence, his presence the only thing anchoring me to this world. I'm not proud of how much I've leaned on him. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror, hollow eyes, lifeless skin, tangled hair, and I turn away. I used to be full of life. Before all the silence, before the betrayal, before my husband, ex-husband, found something younger, brighter, more willing to overlook his flaws and polish his ego. I never thought I'd be here, in this quiet house, with only echoes for company. Fred moved back in from college when the divorce started to unravel me. He took a semester off, said he wanted to be close to home, but I know why. He worried about me. He didn't say it, but I saw it in the way he hovered near the door when he left for the store, the way he checked in even when he was only gone for an hour. "Mom," he said one morning, his voice hesitant as he placed a hand on my shoulder. "Do you want to take a walk? Just around the block." I didn't answer. I couldn't. He tried again. "There's sun today. You like the sun." Did I? I couldn't remember. That morning I said no, just like I had the day before, and the day before that. And yet, he didn't give up. He sat beside me on the couch and turned on some show I used to love. Something about small-town murders and quirky detectives. He didn't talk, just watched. Quiet, present. I think he understood, better than anyone else, that there was no fixing this quickly. The grief wasn't about the man I lost. Not really. It was about the years, the identity, the companionship, the sense that I was someone's person. And now I was no one's anything. I remember one night, not long after he left, I couldn't sleep. I wandered into the kitchen to find Fred sitting at the table with a textbook open in front of him, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. He looked up as I entered, startled, maybe, or just surprised that I wasn't lying in the dark. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly. I shook my head. He stood, pulled a chair out for me. "Want tea?" I nodded. He made chamomile, the kind I used to drink before bed back when life still felt ordinary. We sat in silence, sipping. And when he reached across the table and covered my hand with his, I almost broke. That simple touch undid me in a way 1,000 therapy sessions never could. It wasn't pity in his eyes. It was love. Quiet, fierce love that didn't ask anything in return. The worst part of grief is how selfish it makes you. I saw my son suffering, too, missing his friends, losing momentum in school, putting his entire life on hold for me. And yet, I couldn't tell him to go back. I needed him here. I needed someone who remembered who I used to be. But even then, even in the depth of my sorrow, I began to notice something I didn't know how to name. It was the way he looked at me when I smiled for the first time in weeks. It was the way he noticed when I wore my hair a little differently, or how he lit up when I agreed to go outside. These weren't the glances of a child toward his wounded mother. They were different, softer, unspoken. And yet I said nothing, because I couldn't afford to think too much about what I might be imagining. I was vulnerable. So was he. That night, after we finished our tea, I stood to leave the kitchen and paused. I turned to him and said, "You're the only reason I'm still here." He didn't smile, didn't brush it off with some dismissive joke. Instead, he stood too and wrapped his arms around me. Not just a casual hug. No, this was something else. Solid. Still. Like he was holding me together with sheer will. We stood like that for a long time. I don't know what passed between us in that moment. I only know that it lingered, something unspoken and far too complicated for either of us to touch. I went to bed that night and cried for the first time in days. Not because I missed my husband, but because I was terrified. terrified that maybe the only light in my world now was Fred, and I didn't know if I could live with what that meant. The stairway broke the same day the rain came. One of those early spring downpours that caught the town off guard, flooding the gutters and soaking the flower beds. I remember standing in the hallway, clutching a laundry basket, when the crack rang through the house, a hollow, splintering sound like bones snapping under weight. I looked up just in time to see the third step from the top give way. I didn't scream, but I dropped the basket. Fred was home. He came running, his voice sharp and steady, already assessing before I had time to panic. "You okay?" he asked, touching my arm gently. I nodded. I didn't step on it, just heard it give. He crouched down, inspecting the splintered wood. It's warped underneath. Water damage from the leak we thought was nothing. I should have checked it last month. I started to say it wasn't his fault, but he was already gone, off to the garage. Moments later he returned, toolbox in hand, sleeves pushed up, hair damp from sweat and rain. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching him work, and something in me shifted. He wasn't the boy who used to leave Legos in the hallway anymore. He wasn't the teen who forgot to take the trash out or slept through alarms. He was here, solid, capable, intent on fixing the things I'd started to believe were just going to fall apart, one by one. And not just the stairs. "You don't have to do this right now," I said quietly, knowing he'd ignore me. "I want to," he replied without looking up. "I can't stand seeing things broken around here anymore." There was something about the way he said it, fierce, full of quiet devotion. My eyes burned unexpectedly. He worked for hours, measuring, sawing, sanding. The rain fell harder, thunder rumbling low and distant, but inside, our little house glowed with the soft hum of powered tools and determination. I made him tea, brought him a towel, hovered more than I should have, but I couldn't stop watching. When he finally stood and tested the repaired step with a satisfied nod, he turned to me. "Should hold for years." I smiled, really smiled, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "I'm proud of you," I said softly. Fred shrugged. "I like fixing things." But I knew he wasn't talking about stairs. That same week, he picked up a job offer. A friend of a friend needed extra hands in a local construction crew, roofing, siding, all kinds of work. Fred said yes before I even asked if he was sure. "I've spent too much time in this house," he said one morning as he laced his work boots. "Time to get my hands dirty again." Something about the way he said it made my heart swell and ache at once. I was used to him here, around corners, on the couch, in the kitchen. But I also knew he needed to live, to grow, to go. Still watching him drive off that first morning, his truck coughing to life in the misty light of dawn, I felt proud. Nervous. And also, strangely, peaceful. He was building something. Not just for himself. For us. Over the next few weeks, the rhythm of our home changed. Fred came in smelling of sweat and shingles and sawdust, his shirt damp from labor, his eyes tired but alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. And then the flowers started. The first time, I thought it was a joke. I came downstairs to find a single sunflower in a chipped mug on the kitchen table. "What's this?" I asked, holding it up. Fred shrugged, biting into toast. "You looked tired yesterday. Thought you could use something yellow." The next week, it was tulips, then lilies, then a tiny potted plant with a tag that read "Cheer Up, Grumpy." I laughed when I saw it, and he laughed when I laughed, and somehow the day didn't feel so heavy. He didn't bring flowers every day, but when he did, it was never dramatic. No declarations. Just a silent understanding that I was still here, and so was he. And that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to carry every cracked thing alone. One Sunday morning, as we sat on the porch watching the sun rise over the hedges he'd trimmed himself, Fred turned to me and said, "You're looking more like yourself again." The words caught me off guard. "Am I?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Less ghost. More you." I looked at him, at the man my son had become. The slope of his jaw, the steadiness of his gaze, his kindness, his quiet strength. He had his father's eyes, but none of the coldness, none of the detachment. It struck me then, not just how much Fred had grown, but how safe I felt with him. How long it had been since anyone made me feel that way. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man, and not just any man. A good one, a rare one, I realized I didn't worry as much these days. About bills. About the house. About being alone. Because I wasn't. I caught him looking at me that evening, after dinner as I washed the dishes. He didn't say anything, just leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, smiling a little. "What?" I asked, wiping my hands. He shrugged. "Nothing. You just look nice." I flushed. At my age, compliments felt foreign, like clothes that didn't quite fit. But his voice held no teasing, no discomfort. Just warmth. I was still grieving, yes. But something new had taken root alongside the pain. A strange sort of gratitude. A quiet thrill. The faint stirrings of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. I felt like a woman again. And somehow, in a way I didn't fully understand, Fred had given that back to me. Not through words, but through being there. Through fixing stairs and bringing flowers. Through noticing. Through staying. The weather had turned. Not quite summer, not quite spring. A warm breeze tugged at the branches, and the sky stretched open in that soft, golden way it only does when the world is about to bloom again. It was the kind of afternoon that called for escape. "Let's go for a walk," Fred said suddenly, appearing at the living room doorway, hair tousled, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I looked up from the book I hadn't really been reading. "Now!" He nodded. "Come on, you've been inside all day. I'll even buy you dinner afterward." I raised an eyebrow. "Bribery." "Motivation," he grinned. I hesitated, then reached for my sweater. "Fine. But if I end up with blisters, I'm blaming you." The air was soft on my skin as we stepped out into the late afternoon. The world was colored in pastels, the sun slung low, the trees rustling gently as we made our way down the block. The neighborhood looked different in this light, less like a place I'd retreated into, and more like something alive again. Fred walked beside me, hands in his pockets, matching my pace exactly. We passed the neighbors' houses, the ones I used to visit for book clubs and barbecues before everything in my life broke loose. A few waved from their porches, surprised perhaps to see me outside. I waved back, feeling oddly exposed. "It's kind of beautiful, isn't it?" Fred said, glancing at the fading sun. "It is," I said, and realized I hadn't noticed the beauty of anything in a long time. We walked aimlessly, turning corners without direction, ending up near the small Italian restaurant on the edge of town, the one with the ivy-covered patio and string lights that always looked like something out of a film. Fred paused outside the gate. "Hungry yet?" he asked. I could eat. He opened the gate for me, and I stepped onto the cobblestone patio, the scent of garlic and rosemary wrapping around me like a familiar shawl. We were seated under the lights, a little table for two tucked into a quiet corner. "I haven't been here in years," I said, glancing around. "Last time I was here, I think I was 12, he said. "Dad brought us." A shadow passed briefly over his face, but it was gone just as fast. He didn't speak of his father often, not because he was angry, but because he knew I still bled from that wound. We ordered wine, shared a plate of bread with oil and herbs, talked about nothing and everything. Work, the strange shape of the moon that week, how the town had changed. But there was something beneath our conversation, some undercurrent I couldn't name. At one point, I laughed, really laughed at something he said, and when I looked at him, I found him already watching me. Not in that absent way people sometimes do when they drift through a conversation. No, this was different. He was seeing me, not as his mother, not as the woman who packed his lunch and kissed scraped knees. He was seeing me. I felt it like a current beneath my skin. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Fred blinked and leaned back slightly as if catching himself. "I don't know. You look happy. I haven't seen that in a while." I reached for my glass to hide the way his words stirred something deep in me. "I feel different lately," I admitted. He smiled, and there was a quiet gravity in the way he said, "Good." Dinner passed in slow, golden moments. He paid the check before I could argue, waving me off with a, "You can get the next one." We left the restaurant, and I was surprised to find the streets mostly empty. The town was quiet now, the day folding softly into dusk. We walked again, slower this time, full from food and warmth and something else we didn't know how to name. At one point, we passed an old park. The swings creaked gently in the wind. Fred looked at them and then at me. Remember when I used to beg you to push me for hours? I smiled. And then I'd fake a sore arm so you'd let me sit down. He laughed and nudged my arm playfully. We stopped walking. I turned toward him to say something. What, I'll never know. Because that's when it happened. The shift. Fred looked at me, not with amusement, not with affection, but with something raw and uncertain in his eyes. As though he was standing on the edge of a thought too big to say aloud. What? I asked, softer now. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked up at the trees swaying above us, as if trying to find a way back to safe ground. I don't know how to say this, he said finally, but I think something's changed between us. I stopped breathing. He didn't look away. His voice was steady. I've been trying not to name it. I keep telling myself it's just me being protective or too close after the divorce. But it's more than that, isn't it? I opened my mouth, but no words came. I felt something in my chest. Tight, hot, terrifying and undeniable. I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I needed you to know that when I look at you lately, I don't see someone broken anymore. I see someone incredible. I see a woman who's breathtaking. The word echoed. Breathtaking. I stared at him, heart hammering, unsure if I wanted to run or move closer. He took a step back, sensing my panic. I'm sorry if I crossed a line. I just didn't want to pretend anymore. No, I said, breath catching. You didn't cross anything. He waited, and I couldn't finish the sentence. Because how do you explain to your son, the man who's become your anchor, that something inside you has shifted too? That his presence feels different now, not just safe, but stirring? The silence wrapped around us like fog. And then, slowly, he offered me his hand. I'll walk you home, he said gently. I took it, and as our fingers laced together in the quiet dark, I realized the world I thought had ended was quietly beginning again. We didn't speak much on the walk home that night. The air between us was too full of newness, tender and uncertain, like we had both stepped through an invisible door we never meant to find. I felt it in the way our hands stayed clasped, neither of us mentioning it, neither of us willing to let go. I didn't know what it meant yet. I only knew it felt right, comforting, steady, real, and somehow not wrong. Once inside the house, the warmth wrapped around us like a blanket, and we stood there in the dim light of the entryway for a moment, unsure of what came next. Fred turned to me. His voice was quiet, not hesitant, but deliberate. Natalie! I blinked. It took a second to register, the sound of my own name coming from his lips, unwrapped from all the years of Mom and the roles we've been bound to for so long. Hearing it like that, it was disarming and strangely intimate. I laughed softly. You've never called me that. He shrugged, the corners of his mouth curling just slightly. It felt right. More honest. I nodded, suddenly shy. It is. We both knew something had changed, even if we hadn't named it yet. We didn't need to. The air between us was threaded with unspoken truths. The kind you don't say out loud because they're too sacred, too delicate, too alive. From that night on, something inside me began to settle. It started in small ways. We cooked together more, often brushing past each other in the kitchen, laughter trailing behind us like light. He brought home little things he thought I'd like, tea from a local shop, a new book, a scarf and a color he said reminded him of the sunrise we'd watched together on our last walk. He called me Natalie now, always gently, always with this look, like he was speaking directly to the part of me that hadn't been touched in years. I responded to it, to him, slowly but wholly. There were still moments of hesitation, times I caught myself pulling away, afraid of what others might think, of what I might think, but they were fleeting. Because more than anything, I felt safe with him. Not like I was being protected, but like I was being seen, loved. One evening, I was standing by the sink, rinsing berries for a tart I had no real reason to make. Fred came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. I paused, breath catching at the feeling of him so close, his chin resting on my shoulder. What are you doing? I whispered, not trusting my voice to hold steady. Holding you, he said simply. I turned in his arms, hands still wet from the sink, and looked up at him. His eyes were open, clear, filled with a kind of honesty that made my chest ache. "Natalie," he said again, and this time, it felt like more than just a name. It felt like an offering. He leaned in, slowly, carefully, giving me every second to stop him. I didn't. When our lips met, it wasn't fiery or rushed. It was still, like the settling of quiet snow. It was reverent, warm. It felt like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another, one written not in sorrow or loss, but in something deeper, something real. When we pulled apart, I kept my eyes closed for a moment, holding on to the silence. Then I opened them, found him still looking at me, his thumb brushing softly along my cheek. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I am now." That night, we didn't talk about it. We didn't need to. He kissed me once more before bed, just a soft brush of lips at the edge of my room. Then he whispered, "Sleep well, Natalie," and I did, for the first time in what felt like years. From then on, we moved gently, like two people learning a new language spoken only in glances and gestures. We shared more, walks that stretched long into twilight, dinners that felt like rituals, quiet mornings filled with music and silence alike. There was no fear, no shame, only closeness, warmth, understanding. Fred had become my home. Not the house, not the walls. Him. He started working more, taking extra hours on weekends. I noticed him coming in with paint on his shirt or flecks of plaster in his hair. I asked him once why he was pushing himself so hard. He looked at me almost shy. "I want to build something for us." I reached for his hand. "You already have." In the evenings, we'd sit by the window and watch the streetlights flicker on. Sometimes he'd read while I knit. Other times, we'd just sit close, our bodies speaking in the quiet the way words never could. And always, always, he called me Natalie. Each time, it sounded more like a song. Sometimes I'd wonder how we had arrived here, how grief and love could walk hand in hand. But maybe that's what made it so beautiful. The way the broken pieces had fit back together, differently but stronger. We had lived through the storm, and now we were the calm after it. One morning, as I stood in the backyard drinking coffee, Fred came up behind me and slipped his arms around my waist again. It had become our quiet ritual, this way of greeting the day together. He rested his chin on my shoulder and said, "You know, I never expected to feel this kind of peace. Not with everything that happened." I leaned into him. "Neither did I." He kissed my temple. "But I wouldn't trade it." I turned in his arms, looked up at him and smiled. "Me neither." There, under the soft sun, in the little garden we had neglected for years, we stood quietly, not needing promises or definitions. Only this moment, only each other. And in that stillness, I realized what we had wasn't strange or wrong or borrowed. It was simply love, rebuilt, reshaped, real. And it was ours.